the library staff and the friends of the Gallatin Public Library Board, I welcome you to our fourth and final session of our first Walk to Durham lecture series. Thank you so very much for your support of our programs. We have been encouraged by your interest and your attendance. Today's presenter is Velma Howell Brinkley. Velma is a retired educator. She has also served as a grant writer, a court-appointed special advocate, and a speech and drama coach. She is a published author, a historian for her church and for her family, and a Sumner County Historical Society board member. Please help me welcome Velma Brinkley. To the library board, friends that I know and friends that I'm yet to meet, thank you so much for your presence. It says a lot about Gallatin. But then, what would you expect? We are the nicest city in the Bob Morgan, an old friend of mine, should be standing right here beside me, as he and I both loved, admired, respected all things Walter Durham. Walter literally nearly killed us both. During the 2 years that we spent with him working on the Gallatin Bicentennial. Linda is here and can attest to that every word I'm saying is true. He nearly killed her too. Walter Durham, you see, was chair of that mayor-appointed board. Bob Morgan was our treasurer, and I chaired the church committee group. One day, Bob was making what should have been a simple delivery for Walter over to Rucker Stewart School. Well, somehow Bob had an encounter with a door. The door won, and Bob ended up with a gash in his head and blood spewing everywhere. He was rushed to the ER, and they gave him 6 stitches, and all was well. No more than 2 weeks later, he was running another errand, this time to the tobacco factory. Bob slipped and fell and broke his left wrist. When he showed up at the ER, the surgeon looked at him and said, "Weren't you just in here 2 weeks ago?" Sheepishly, Bob said, "Yes, I was." Well, a few weeks after that, Walter sent Velma up the ridge to Portland for a speaking engagement. And Bob and I were so silly. When Walter said go, we just asked when. That was all we needed to know. When do you want us to go and where to? So the weather was perfectly clear in Gallatin, great forecast, all was well. So much so, I didn't even ask Frank to go with me. I took off up the ridge. Upon arrival, I noticed as we were entering the building, I immediately noticed there were no windows. I thought, I can deal with this. I have claustrophobia, so windowless buildings I do not care for. But I thought, no problem, I'm not gonna deal with that. I'm going on in and do what I have to do and go home. At 8 o'clock that night, As we exited the building with no windows, we were shocked. There was 1 foot of freshly fallen snow, and the snow was coming down faster and in larger flakes than I had ever seen in my life. To make matters worse, my new pastor from another state had only been at our church for 3 months. And to surprise me, he had gotten directions and had driven up the ridge. Well, here I stand, a foot of snow, a pastor who says, Mama B, I don't know how to get back down the ridge. I said, not to worry. I know that, he said, I'm afraid I'll get on a side street. I said, not to worry. I know the ridge well. I was trying to comfort him. I was scared down. So I said, just follow me. So I got in my battle axe and started slowly toward the ridge, praying every minute of the way.
That's right.
As I neared Vandyville, near the top of the ridge, I saw police lights flashing everywhere. I said, oh, not a wreck. When I got close, I realized they were blocking the road. I rolled my window down. They said, the road is closed. The ridge is impassable. You must turn around. Pastor Jackson rolled his window. I said, not to worry. I know another way home. He said, okay. He was following along behind me. I decided to go north to the interstate and come down. As I am heading back toward Portland, the snow was so thick and fast, my wipers could no longer keep up with it. And I realized it was getting heavier as I was heading north. I thought, this is not working. What now, Velma? I thought, oh, I know. I've been a counselor at White House High School, but it had been 10 years ago. I remember there's a road at this light that you can go to White House. I thought, that's what I'll do. So I took the left road to White House. The only thing I had forgotten, there is a steep hill in New Deal that one has to climb to get to White House. So I was in front in my heavy battle axe. So I thought, well, I believe I need to get all the speed I can get to make it to the top. And I did. I floored it. First of all, I put it in the center of the road, said a prayer. I said, God, I'm either coming home to you or I'm going home. I did keep my eyes open, and I floored it and got almost to the summit, and it started sliding back down the hill. So this time, Pastor Jackson saw what was going on. He backed up to give me more space to get up more speed, and this time I said, I'm gonna go someplace, and there's a ravine on either side of this hill. I thought, I am going someplace tonight. I checked my belt to make sure it was tight, in case I started rolling, it would at least hold me in the car. So I gave it every bit. I had that pedal to the floor. And fortunately, I reached the summit. I said, oh, thank you, God. I stopped to wait for him. Of course, my car was covered with snow, the back window. And I sat there waiting for him. I saw lights through the snow, what I thought was lights. And suddenly they disappeared. I thought, oh, he's sliding back down the hill. Second time, same results. I looked forward, and much to my surprise, there was a tractor with a bunch of boys cutting figure eights, just having a grand old time. They had a chain, a huge logging chain. I thought, oh gosh, I'm in heaven. I'm in White House. I love everybody in White House, and everybody in White House loves me. I rolled that window down. I said, hey boys, this is Miss Brinkley, your counselor. Get over here quick, I need you. They came running. Miss Brinkley, what are you doing out here? I said, that's another story. I helped a pastor at the bottom of the hill. Please, can you get him? They said, don't worry, we'll have him up here in 10 minutes or less. And true enough, they had that tractor, that logging chain, in no time flat. Through the snow, I could see the glimmer of lights. I said, thank you, God, again. So we got him up there, up to the top of the hill, and I said, now you wait and let me get ahead. So I got ahead again and headed to the interstate. Had to go all the way to Rivergate and then back up. At any rate, from the time that we left Portland until the time I got to my house, 3 hours had passed. But was I ever grateful? Was I ever grateful to see Gallatin? Upon learning of my ordeal, in addition to what her husband Bob had been through, Martha, the wife to Bob, sat down, took pen to paper, with tongue in cheek. She wrote a poem, and that poem was extolling the commitment that Bob and I had to Walter and the Gallatin Bicentennial. That is the funniest but truest poem I have ever heard. All right, this is, thank you. On the first film here, this little note is from Walter. Walter gave me so much. Walter was just exceedingly insistent, persistent, reassuring, and encouraging to me. During the last 15 years of his life, we really became close. And Bob Morgan says, Velma, you and Walter really had a strange but close relationship. I never told Bob what it was. The reality is Walter and my father have many of the very same characteristics. And that is why I so admired and loved Walter Durham, because I'm a daddy's girl. And that's kind of what Walter was to me. I want you to know that if it were not, and I say this most sincerely, if it were not for Walter Durham, none of the 6 books that you see on this table would be in existence. That is what Walter Durham meant to me. So library committee, you are right on target. In my world, Walter is Mr. Tennessee and certainly Sumner County history. I can think of none other more deserving. Once or twice every month for the last 15 years of his life, in my mailbox I would pull out a letter from Walter Durham. Apparently Glenda only bought business-length envelopes because he never sent it in a small envelope. It was always a full size. And Walter was always telling me in a tidbit about something that he knew would intrigue me sufficiently to go and investigate, research. In this note, he is telling me that he had found a reference to a charter that had been issued to a Sumner County Colored Blood Horse Association. And he ends the note with, "You might want to check this out. Walter. And of course, the next time I would see Walter, he was going to ask me, did you get my note? He was so tactful. He wouldn't say, have you been to the archives yet? He would say, did you get my note? Okay, frame 2, please. Next. The first historical snippet that we're going to do tonight is that of Hillary Watwood Key. This man was a force to be reckoned with in Gallatin and in the state of Tennessee in the arenas of politics, education, and religion. But listen to this. Hillary was born into slavery on December 24th, 1833. He died July 14th, 1912, at 78 years of age. Hillary was born to slaves Benjamin and Hannah Key, and he grew up on the Fairview plantation here in Gallatin. Hillary was the oldest of 3 children. He was the 3rd child born into a slave family of 8 children, 5 boys and 3 girls. Just the opposite, 5 girls and 3 boys. Next, please. Okay, Isaac Franklin died in 1847. And this is an excerpt from the 1846 inventory of slaves held on his Gallatin plantation. He had other plantations in Louisiana. This family that you see up here this is the father of the family, Benjamin Key. He was 35 years old, and his value was $500. This is called a slave inventory. Hannah was Hillary's mother, 35. She was valued at $450. Louisa, 18, $550. Lucinda, 16, was worth only $20. Hillary, the person that we're discussing, was 14, and his value was $500. Francis, 7, $200. Luke, 5, $200. And Jack, 2, $100. Now, I'm sure you're saying you're missing 2 more children. True, that's because 2 more girls had not yet been born at the time that this inventory was made. There's something quite interesting there. The fact that Lucinda is valued at only $20. Ken, why might that be?
She was probably afflicted in some way.
Yeah, she would have been, that indicates that she would have been handicapped either physically or mentally. It's interesting also that Louisa, 18, was valued at more than either the mother or the father. Why might that be? She held the potential to be a money maker because she held the potential to birth a dozen children.
Right.
So that's what made her more valuable, and that's what that is, a slave inventory. Slave owners wanted to know, what their value was. Okay. This family was owned by Isaac Franklin and lived on the Fairview plantation, which he built in Gallatin, which he built just outside of Gallatin. Isaac Franklin was known in Sumner County and actually around the world, certainly around America, as one of America's wealthiest men, having made much of his money as a slave trader. He had oodles of acres out in Texas. He owned all kinds of stocks.
He had money invested in the railroad. He had other plantations in the state of Louisiana. His grand home is still occupied today, and its surrounding land that once held crops, horses, cattle, slaves, and their dwellings now holds homes up to millions in value. Next, please. Now, I hope you can help me with this puzzle. Missing. After that previous listing where we saw Hillary and what he was valued at, he does not show up again in my research for 19 years. And that is a puzzle to me. Tradition, which is oral history, tradition has two theories. One of them is, and I read these in Christian magazines published by the Methodist. One says that Hillary saw himself sold for $1,800 during this 19-year absence. Another theory is that Hillary bought his freedom for $1,500. There is one thing that I do know that I can document happened. He married Martha during that 19-year absence. I don't know if it were legal or if it were common law, but I do know that he took a wife. Hillary's next appearance after 1846 was March 18th of 1865. He is found buying 1 1/4 acre of land in Gallatin for $700. Then in February of 66, he registered a protest to the Freedmen's Bureau regarding the Fairview plantation. He is serving as an ombudsman for these people who have just been freed by the Emancipation Proclamation, who were on that plantation. They are still squattering. They are still living there. And they said, they sought his help because they were saying, we have been told that we must get off this plantation in X number of days, and that is not what the law says. And Hillary says that is right. So he filed a petition on their behalf. I don't have his, I wish I had a copy of his petition so I could see the handwriting, etc., etc., but I don't. I simply have a copy of the response from the Tennessee head of the Freedmen's Bureau back to him, saying that they did not have to vacate that premise immediately, that was not the case. So the person that Hillary was telling on, Proctor, I think was his name, he said, no, I did not say they had to leave. I suggested that they start looking for a place to go. So there was a difference in had to, and I suggested that they start searching for some place to go. And then in 1869, I found where he filed an answer to a lawsuit regarding being an administrator or guardian ad litem for someone, and those are functions that you don't perform if you can't read. So during that 19-year period, I'm certain that he married Martha, and I am 99 9/10% certain that he learned to read and write. So I tend to subscribe to the theory that he bought his freedom and learned all of this during that missing time period. Okay? For example, January 5th, 1870, he filed a declaration of his intent to take advantage of the Homestead Act. In the 1870 census, he was still living in Gallatin. And I have a list that shows where he was, what he was doing every year from 1865 up until the year he died. But that is nowhere on here. So I'm still trying to figure out where was Hillary for 19 years. Next, please. Okay, Hillary Key, look at what he did in politics, religion, and education. And you will go away knowing that during those 19 years, first of all, he was innately highly intelligent. And during those 19 years, he was studying. Somebody was teaching him something. This is what he built. And this was not built by an illiterate person who could neither read nor write. This is the church that he built on the south end of Blythe Street. It has now been changed to Dorothy, the name has changed to Dorothy Jordan Boulevard. This is the brick home, and guess what? This is his home. This is in the early, like within 4 years of slavery ending. So he had a head start on learning in order for all of this to take place. According to my chart, and I have no reason to second guess my chart, he left Gallatin in 1870, right after the census was taken. Census taken, he was here. Right after census, he disappeared. I always thought he went to Carthage, Murfreesboro, and built those buildings, but he did not. He went west. He went to Mason and Brownsville, Tennessee. That's where he spent the next immediate years. Okay? Next, please. Okay, this image shows a 1950 view. This is the very same church that you saw in the other building, but this shows what it looked like in 1950, and you have all of the members out, and that band is called the Sunday School Publishing Board. The African American community in Gallatin, for some reason, has been so well blessed with musicians. These, when I say the Sunday School Publishing Board, these players were so good, they played at the National Baptist Convention. It didn't matter what state or city it was in, Los Angeles, Illinois, wherever. They joined in with musicians from Nashville, and they boarded a train and went to play for the National Baptist Convention. They were so good that all along the way, whatever rail station they were in, they would always be asked to get off and play while people were exiting and others were boarding the train. So that Gallatin has always produced some tremendous musicians. And I didn't look, but Randy, isn't your grandfather on here? Do you see him?
He's dead.
He's at that point, oh yeah.
He died in 1940. Mr. Gwynn was the band director at that time.
Okay, he followed your grandfather.
My grandfather, yeah, he took over when he died. My granddad died in 1940.
Okay, this is Randy Offit. His grandfather was considered to be the father of band music in Sumner County.
And Julia.
But only thing is, Randy can't sing or play. I take that back, that was a joke. Randy sings beautifully. I don't know about the playing.
Ma'am,
Have you played an instrument?
one time I played it on a horn, just didn't make much noise.
But his family has contributed so much to music. Next, please. Okay, this is Key Memorial United. Oh, and incidentally, the other church that I showed you, that church was Key Memorial on Blythe Street in Gallatin. And in the late 40s or early 50s, when a new pastor came to town and built a new church, he was honored with his name being added. Thus we get Key Stewart. But Reverend Hillary Key was indeed the founder. This is Key Memorial United Methodist Church in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. He built that one. Next. This is Key United Methodist Church in Hartsville, Tennessee. Next. Okay. These, I have never heard of any one person building or rebuilding this many churches. And guess what? I left two off. Alamo and Brownsville, Tennessee. When I was talking to his grandson, great-grandson, Reverend Hillary Key has two great-grandsons that are precious. I'd rather talk with either than have a meal. And here in the past month, I've had the opportunity to talk to them several times. And I talked with his daughter, with Vernon's daughter. No, not Vernon. Vernon has been in a car wreck. So he was not up and able to talk to me. He's not doing too well. But Marion, Vernon lives in Ohio. Marion lives in California, and his daughter was at his house. So when she answered the phone, I thought that was odd, because he grabbed, you ring once, he's on that phone answering. So when the phone rang 3 times and a daughter answered, I said, "Where's your daddy?" She said, "He's in the hospital." I said, "Oh, I am so sorry to hear that." She said, "Oh, Mama and I am just going to get him." I said, "Good, he will be so glad to get home." She said, "He won't be as happy as that hospital is to get rid of him." So Hillary's legacy lives on. The great-grandson that I was speaking with is a part of the National Red Cross Society. He spent quite a number of years working for the Red Cross overseas, and he spent 20-something years working for the National Red Cross in America. So that's how he earned his living, and he truly is a hoot. Okay, next. And notice number 14. I put a year beside number 14 and number 1. The next, please. Okay. New Centenary in Memphis, Tennessee was Reverend Key's flagship monument. At his death in 1912, its value was a whopping $35,000. That building was a monument to his willingness to sacrifice his all for the spread of the gospel. He mortgaged and lost 300 acres of his 650 150-acre farm. He may have lost the land, but he saved his grand church. He was a charter member of the original 1866 Tennessee Conference for Negroes. He introduced 3 churches into that conference when it was beginning, the churches that he had started over here. This is Bishop Allen, Bishop Richard Allen. Key revered this man, for he had started the African Methodist Episcopal Church as the founder of that faith. His motto was, "I perceive of a truth that God is no respecter of persons. The just shall live by faith." And that was what Hillary Key wanted to hear. Because when Hillary Key got to Memphis, he was shocked. He joined New Centenary only to find out that he was only permitted to preach to African Americans. He was not permitted to preach to whites. And he says, why? I don't understand this. We have the same faith, same belief, same God. So his theory was really appealing to him. So I kind of think it probably was the first church split for African Americans in America. Hillary said, the like-minded people with me, that we're going to have one God, we're going to worship the same, we're going to move. And the African Americans who believed and were in line with the white leadership of Centenary Church, it wasn't new, it was just Centenary. They said, well, we're going to stay with this body. So that body said, this building is getting old, dilapidated. We need a new church anyway. Let's us leave them here and let's take off and go and build us a new church. Well, Hillary Key was not too thrilled with that. He was not going to be outdone. So he thought, okay, we'll just raise this building and we'll build us a church. But this time we're going to rename it, not Centenary, New Centenary. He put up almost half of he was a very wealthy man. He put up half of his land, 300 acres, to get the money to build New Centenary. And there was some finagling around, probably some backroom politics, but at any rate, he lost the acreage, but he saved the church. And he said that was all that mattered, was that he saved the church. Now, next please. This is his flagship church. And in 1906, for an African American, and that's Hillary as he appeared in 1906, for an African American to attempt such an edifice is really quite staggering. But that is the edifice that he spent his all, lost 300 acres of his land, but he didn't care because he was able to save his church. And I'm looking at it from a humanistic perspective. He saved face. So both were to him worth it. Now, on to his educational endeavors. This man, the slave, was the co-founder of the first college in Tennessee that educated African Americans. And it's Tennessee Central College in Nashville. He was one of the co-founders. So you know during the 19 years he was studying something. In 1900, that university was renamed Walden College. Reverend Key and Martha had 3 children. The oldest was a boy. When that boy finished Walden, he sent him right on to Meharry Medical College. That child became a doctor. His 2 daughters graduated college. Marion's ancestor did not like her name. She was Mariah. So guess what? She changed her name. And in that day, for someone to be talking about spending money to change her name, duh, which means he had plenty of money. She changed her name from Mariah to Maria. Go figure, I like Mariah better. But at any rate, she married a dentist. So that may have had something to do with her changing her name. At any rate, the other daughter married here in Gallatin. Reverend Key was the founder of a school in his home. Mason, Tennessee was his home, and he founded a preparatory school in order to be able to send students up to Nashville. He was also bestowed an honorary doctoral degree, doctorate of theology by Walden University. Reverend Key was a public school teacher as well as an adjunct professor over at Walden College. The land that Walden stood on is now a park. That school closed. Walden closed in 1925. And I am so proud to say that it was no hanky-panky involved. It died a natural death. Unlike Roger Williams that was burned down because George Peabody needed and wanted the land, it burned down mysteriously. It took 4 fires at different places in the same night to burn it down, but it burned and George Peabody got the campus. It is now a part of Vanderbilt, but this was not the case. This school just closed, had a natural death, and 10 years later, it was bought by the Nazarene University. And that is that. My timekeeper has told me it is time, and I haven't even gotten to all his politics. But let me answer any questions that you might have, and if any of you have any input on what might have happened or anything you know, or where I can go to find what happened during those 19 years, I would welcome it. Yes?
When are you going to be speaking again?
Did I ask that?
Next Tuesday.
I have no idea. I have no idea. Anything else?
Where is his wife from?
Martha? Martha, I do not know where he married Martha, but I suspect Gallatin.
You don't know who she was?
Actually, there are still descendants. Hillary Key actually has descendants in and around Gallatin. But when you get down this many generations, people don't pursue it. Yes?
Did you say how he made all of his money?
On his big farm. He was a shrewd farmer. And that is how he made his money. Same way as my great-grandfather, who was mulatto. My great-grandfather's white father, who was from Wales, went with him to register his 120-acre farm, and the person who was sitting there recording it was looking at Mr. Howell, who was one of the wealthiest white men in that part of Mississippi. She did not know if his son who was with him was passing, if that was his intent for his son. So she did not bother chance him insulting the father. She just recorded my great-grandfather, Alfred, as white. And he certainly is, look at me, he is certainly not white. He was mulatto, half white, half black. So he had been taught by his father how to take the farm and make it grow. When I was writing my family history, I had to talk, our farm has always sat in the middle of white farms. My neighbors all from the day I was born were white, and they still are. And we still have the farm. The farm has been it's a century farm. We've had it since 1871. And now we have Angus cattle roaming instead of crops. So that's, their fathers taught them how to make money. At certain times you hawk everything that you own, even the kitchen sink if need be, and go ahead and grow as much and as many different crops as you can. And once you get your money, you go and pay off the debt. And it worked well. One of the white families, the Martins, who've been our neighbors all my life, was telling me, Velma, did you know that my grandfather bought $20 silver pieces off of your great-grandfather? I said, where did he get $20 silver pieces? He said he should have. He didn't give his wife anything. He said she had to buy the cloth to make the clothes for the children, run the house on money she earned from the garden, from selling eggs, selling chicken, whatever. He gave her no money, and that's why he died. Really, I kid you not. My history book documents it. He died of a broken heart. The banks went belly up, and all of his money was in the bank. And when he got in, that you couldn't just rush in the bank. When he got in the bank, guess what the return was? 10 cents on the dollar. And he went home and grieved. And he literally, I mean, it's an accepted family fact that he literally grieved himself to death. And in my family, and I'm still mad at it because the wealth should have been passed on down. But at any rate, let me share this little bit about Reconstruction. As a politician, this man who was born into slavery became superintendent of the Sumner County Freedmen's Bureau. That was a hard-to-get job, and once you got it, everybody was shooting darts at you, trying to get you out of that. When I read that account, I literally sat in the library and laughed until I cried. One man wanted the job, so he got a woman to help him pretend that the superintendent of the Freedmen's Bureau had made a sexual pass at her, trying to get the job. It was tough holding that job. He was elected. Now this is really, Walter and I really had a discussion about this. He was elected to the Gallatin City Council on December the 5th, 1868 as an alderman. Hold it. Elected president of the Board of Aldermen on April 3rd, 1869, and was to act as mayor in absence of said officer. I asked Walter, I said, Walter, does this not mean that he was our first black vice mayor? And of course, you know tactful Walter. He says, well, Velma, Well, it seems that way, doesn't it? He said, but now you do know that our mayor is of another opinion, and there are other people, and sometimes information is better if you sit on it rather than disclose it if it probably will hurt someone. I said, well, okay, I'll just let Dr. Malone continue to think she's the first black man. Okay, he was one of 7 Sumner incorporators of the Lebanon and Gallatin Telegraph Company on February 26, 1869. During Reconstruction, he was appointed by Governor Brownlow to serve as a loyal agent. In that role, he made out claims from people resulting from the Civil War. In other words, if you had a claim against the state, against the city, against the county that was provable, the state would reimburse you. And they had 3 persons performing that role, and Hillary Key was one of the 3. He had to have known how to read and write. He was president of the council number 4 of the Union League in 1869. And this number 7 floored me because I didn't read it until I got to his obituary. He self-reported to the person that wrote his obituary to having been a spy under General Payne. And you know that would have been where? Gallatin. He said, and I quote, "I engaged in many hazardous undertakings for the cause of the Union and the freedom of the Negro race." And I didn't know that until I was reading his obit. At his funeral, his son-in-law, who was a dentist, said, as a father, he was kind and provident. As a friend, he was always accessible. And he lived a life that was unspotted and died embracing the faith he so long espoused. Hillary Watwood Key went from a slave pen to a conference room at the state capitol. And I can say, job well done. I seem to have 2 more minutes because Kay has not tackled me yet. But let me tell you this. I had thought about 2 other snippets, and I'm going to tell you this because some of you would like to maybe do research or whatever. But one of them had to do with Thurgood Marshall. Did you know, who was a Supreme Court justice, right? Yes. Did you know that Thurgood Marshall was nearly lynched in Tennessee? He was. There was a Columbia, Tennessee case. Interestingly enough, it's almost funny. 2 men, a black man and a white man, had served overseas in the war together. They were buddies, bunk buddies, came back home to Columbia, and everything changed. The black gentleman had taken his mom's $2 radio into the shop to be repaired. So when he and his mom went back to retrieve it, something ensued, some kind of dispute that ended in a fist fight between the 2 soldiers. And that simple fist fight grew into charges against 25 African Americans for murder. And the NAACP had to bring out of Baltimore, Maryland, Thurgood Marshall. He was at that time practicing law. They had to bring him south, and the NAACP told him to go down, set up him a team, but win. Doesn't matter what it took, just win. And Thurgood Marshall went to Nashville, assembled him a lawyer of whites and blacks, Alexander Luby. Remember the name? Luby Library. Alexander Luby was one of those, and to be honest with you, Alexander Luby really was the one who won the case. He was the one doing the legwork, but it's always the person with the big name that gets the credit. But at any rate, it's almost hilarious. They had to move the case out of Columbia to another city. So Thurgood Marshall was trying this case in front of an all-white jury. And for the first time in the history of Tennessee, not guilty was the verdict. So the Columbia people were so upset and angry, they said, well, they had put out on the grapevine, we're just going to kill him. We're going to lynch him down by the river. They had a lynching tree, throw him in the river, and no one will be the wiser. So they arrested him and said that he was drunk. He's coming from court. And that's the best charge you can find, but that was a charge. They said, you got to appear before the magistrate. So the other carload of black Luby and the white policeman said, he's not been out of our sight. They said, you all go on. They said, no, we're staying. That other car got on the tail end of the police cars because they didn't know what was up. That police officer tried to shake that car, but they hung close, and they went all around the bend and back again. So when they got back to Columbia, Marshall says, where's everybody? Why are all the windows closed, the blinds pulled in the stores? And one of the officers said, they're down by the creek. See, a hanging was a big social event. You got dressed up to go to a hanging. And that was the plan. If he won, he was to be hung down by the river and on the hanging tree and dumped into the river. And no one, if the other lawyers had left him, that's what would have happened. But they, considering the fact that the other lawyers were all there, they had to take him before a magistrate who decided no, he hadn't had anything to drink, so they let him go. But the other lawyers said they were only smart enough not to leave him because of what had happened a few days before. The white lawyers had to go early, and one of their wives was so intrigued she wanted to see everything in that case. So she got left behind. And but she didn't think anything about it. She called them and said, hey, I want to go to court. Would you all swing by and give me a ride? They did. Thurgood Marshall said he had no idea of what the severity of that in the South. They gave her a ride to the trial, and the whole demeanor of the court changed. And during the trial, Thurgood Marshall went over to her and said, if you don't have a way home today, I suggest you ask somebody how to find a bus station. You will not be riding back with us. So she didn't know, and none of them, they were just innocent. Right. So at any rate, after they made sure that she got on the bus, then the tenor of the courtroom went back. Opening last 4 or 5 days ago is the movie Marshall. I can't wait for Frank to take me because I want to see if any reference about the Tennessee situation is in it. Got 1 minute. Another snippet that I was going to share with you that if you have time you might want to read is Oklahoma City. Remember when the bombing of the Murrah Federal Building took place?
Yes.
That had a Gallatin, a Sumner County tie. That building, when you're going down the street, is on the right. I have relatives in Oklahoma City, so I'm there often. At least I used to be, not anymore. And at the end, when you're at the federal building, you can look and see a huge 3-story red brick church that was founded by African Americans from Castellian Springs, Gallatin, all of the outer lying areas. After slavery, they got together and headed west. And along on that wagon train, they formed a church.
Wow.
And this church is so historic. It has stained glass ceilings. And the name of every Sumner Countyan I've never seen it before. I didn't know that you could write the names in stained glass windows. And I was fortunate enough to make pictures of those. And the ceiling, a big section of it is stained glass. The federal government was so moved that that type of act would destroy such an historic facility that the federal government gave them $2 million toward the restoration. And the church paid the rest of it. So it is back up and operating still. You have been a wonderful audience, and I am so grateful.